All right, and so we got our second day of the book club for the German ideology.
Varsity left.
Oh, Varsity's
I
back
was
here.
back.
So I'm gonna go ahead and stream the PDF as well. So let me just set that up. Okay. And I will start off by reading the first paragraph. We're on section History Fundamental Conditions. Since we are dealing with the Germans, who are devoid of premises, we must first begin by stating the first premise of all human existence, and therefore of all history. The premise, namely, that men must be in a position in order to be able to make history. But life involves, before everything else, eating and drinking, a habitation, clothing, and many other things. The first historical act is thus the production of the means to satisfy these needs, the production of the material of life itself. And indeed, this is an historical act, a fundamental condition of all history, which today, as thousands of years ago, must daily and hourly be fulfilled merely in order to sustain human life. Even when the sensuous world is reduced to a minimum, to a stick, as with St. Bruno, it presupposes the action of producing the stick. Therefore, in any interpretation of history, one has first of all to observe this fundamental fact in all its significance and all its implications and accord it its due importance. It is well known that the Germans have never done this, and they have never, therefore, had an earthly basis for history, and consequently never an historian. The French and the English, even if they had conceived the relation of this fact with so-called history only in an extremely one-sided fashion, particularly as long as they remained in the toils of political ideology, have nevertheless made the first attempt to give the writing of history a materialistic basis, by being the first to write histories of civil society, of commerce, and industry. Okay. Who would like to go next, or do you want to stop and talk about anything?
Uh, just reminded of some silly zoology stuff, which probably maybe indicates something about maybe the time Marx was writing. But I mean, like, just saying, like, oh, it's when history begins, then we start to, like, I mean, like, because there's a lot of animals that, like, find tools to, like, use. But I think there's, like, side just the tool usage, which I think Marx would probably might get into later. But I think it's interesting that it's like to emphasize, like, oh, we use, like, a tool to gain, like, food. When I mean, like, look at zoology videos and you see stuff about, like, like, all the crazy stuff, like ants or whatever will do for their, or, like, they'll, like, literally, like, have, like, farms of, like, of I forget what the name of the insect is, but they actually, like, farm, like, food from, like, this other insect. So, like, I don't know, it's just like a food for, I don't know if it's, like, very relevant, but it's, like, it's sort of, like, probably indicates the time that maybe the research on other animals wasn't as developed. Say that this is one of the key things of, like, the human organism is its relationship with tools or whatever.
Oh yeah. Um,
I just would know. I don't really think it's about like the usage of tools in general. I think it's really the means of subsistence. That's the most important part. I think it's like it's supposed to be pointing to the manner of which the tool like takes up, like what the tool means in those societies that are developing like agriculture and all these things. It's a, I mean, I don't know. I think that what he's trying to do is to indicate to something that's not just like, I don't know, like the use of like simple machines. It's like something different than that even.
Yeah,
it's
the
in opposition to like beginning history with thought in some way, right? Or like with philosophy. Like he's trying to make a counter, like, no, you should start with like how people produce things and sustain themselves, right?
Yeah, he's
I
basically
think
giving us.
maybe. I think maybe though that kind of also falls into the trap of taking that notion of like the tool as not what he's trying to take it as, which is like this like societal means of producing uh society, like of the means of by which like we produce like the modalities, the social modalities that we have right now, like what is actually possible in our minds. Like he's trying to say that these means of subsistence condition that.
Well, I mean, this is it gets into like a different philosopher, but like Lebanon talks about like how.
Wait, I kind of wanted to hear what Varsity was going to say first, and then
Okay,
keep it
sorry,
in
go
mind.
on.
I want to hear that too.
I mean, I would second everything Wandering said, and I think Marx will clarify that a little bit more later on. Not too much, but
You're roboting. While he's gone, just to clarify, you said that he's talking about modalities rather than
No, it's not that I think he's like talking about modalities. It's a way for me to, provide a tool that I think is useful for understanding kind of what he's talking about. Because I don't think that obviously Marx refers to anything in terms of modality, but like what I was trying to highlight is just that it like frames what's actually physically possible, like what's conceivable for a human. You know?
Gotcha. All right, Varsity's back.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I was going to say is I look at this as basically Marx is giving us the instructions for how to do history from a materialist perspective as opposed to an idealist one. That would be how I would summarize this paragraph.
Right. All right.
I
Would
was
you like
gonna
to
say something, but
sorry,
I
Josh.
just interrupted. I don't know if it's like sorry. I mean, you can go on if you want.
I mean, if you can think of it, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you
I
off.
don't know. I was just gonna mention. I don't know. I trying to apply books I've read to different contexts, but I remember I read a book by Levinas about, and he talks about how labor is connected to like discourse in a way. I'm wondering if that might be relevant to some of the what makes like the use of the tool as a medium of society just different from the way like animals use it. Like it's there's almost like this maybe some I don't know if but maybe that would be too idealist. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think when Marx talks about the way that it was explained to me when I first started reading this book was that when Marx talks about, he's not talking about just producing like with tools. Like it's not just the tool, it's the fact that we're able to choose how we produce things and come up with better ways to produce things, more efficient ways to produce things. So even if there might be, and I mean, I'm just arguing, putting myself in Marx's shoes, I think he would say that even if there are some animals that might make use of things in a way that's analogous to the way we might make use of tools, they're not like they're not developing upon those tools any further than whatever use they might be able to derive from them as they appear ready-made in nature.
I think I think that part of what allows humans to do probably our might be like our capacity for a discourse that allows us to contemplate like our and the possibility. I don't know. Sorry, I don't
I
know.
don't know too much about Levinas, but when I hear that word contemplate as like the distinguisher between us and animals, I would be pretty confident in stating that that's not how Marx likes to distinguish
I
between
don't think
us and
he uses the term
non-human animals.
I don't think he uses the term contemplate either. I'm just
Yeah, that thing's more like Aristotelian than.
no, fucking sorry, whatever.
No, you're good. I'm just, I'm kind of listening to what everyone's saying, but I also am like, I'm just looking at the text itself, and it just is like writing the history in the materialistic basis. Well, I mean, what's the alternative? Is he talking about like how Germans want to write history from an ideal basis instead? Is that like the implication?
Yeah, I think this paragraph is fairly straightforward. I mean,
Yeah.
as far as much as you can get in a text like this, it's pretty straightforward.
Right. It seems like
Yeah,
he's just
he literally says Saint Bruno, which is referring to Bruno Bauer, right?
right. Right, Bruno, and probably like phenomenology of the spirit too, or whatever other weird history Germans came up with.
Well, yeah, I mean, and even in more simple terms, Marx is thinking all of the ideas, all of the values, religion, culture, all that stuff is great, but, well, maybe not the religion part, he would say, isn't so great. But all that stuff only happens if we're able to have food, drink, habitat, clothing, etc. That stuff has to come first before we can even begin to start developing anything like, higher up on the Maslow triangle, so to speak.
Right. All right, Josh, you want to take the second paragraph?
Who's reading it? Or
I was asking if you wanted to.
oh, okay. The second point in that. Sorry, I'll speak up a bit more. The second point is that the satisfaction of the first need, the action of satisfying, and the instant instrument of satisfaction which has been acquired leads to new needs, and this production of new needs is the first historical act. Here we recognize immediately the spiritual ancestry of the great historical wisdom of the when they run out of positive material, and when they come to serve, they can serve up neither theological nor political nor literary rubbish, assert that this is not history at all, but the prehistoric era. They do not, however, enlighten us as to how we proceed from the nonsensical prehistory to history proper. Although, on the other hand, in their historical speculation, they seize upon this prehistory, with a special eagerness because they imagine themselves safe there from interference on the part of crude fact, and at the same time because they can give full rein of their speculative impulse and set up and knock down hypotheses by the thousand.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when
Yeah, so
people
we're
want
already
to do. Oh, go ahead.
we're already kind of starting to see some expansion on the previous kind of issue that we were having before, where he talks about the production of new needs is the first historical act. Like ants, I mean, I'm not I'm not much of a zoologist myself, so I'm
I know
of
I guess
of how ants work, but they do something that's analogous to the use of tools. Like, as far as I'm aware, I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know, like, be an ant, but as far as I'm aware, ants do not then take all that extra time that they have now that they've made their anthill enterprise much easier to accomplish. They don't have, like, they're not developing culture and abstracting from the activity of anthill building and asking, like, what is the inner nature of the anthill, or whatever. What is the that sort of thing. Like, I mean, and
What is
this
the
is
history
kind
of
of
the
open
anthill?
question. Like, my kind of open question too for Marx is, like, he uses the word need, and I'm very cautious about just taking that out and saying, well, oh, we can just talk about the production of desire, and we can sneak some Lacan in here if we want. I'm very reticent to do that, because I think Marx is very particular about the words he chooses. But with that said, I think this is the kind of thing that does open Marx up to, like, having some appeal for people who are interested in his line of thinking, not just from a purely economical or even philosophical standpoint, but people like Lacan who are studying, like, desire. Because, like, as we produce, like, as we get more efficient, we get better at taking care of the basic needs of existence, food, shelter, and so on. Now we have the opportunity to experience, like, higher order desires, desire being something that goes beyond mere need. I don't want to beat that, I don't want to like overemphasize that, but I think I just wanted to point that out as like, I feel like this is an aspect of Marx's thought that lends itself maybe more than others to people like Lacan coming in and scooping Marx up and saying, let me do something of my own with this, if that makes sense.
Well, I had
That's completely fantastic, and I quickly just wanted to add real quick that I really amazing that Marx comments on like this idea of like the prehistory. I think that is as pseudoscientific to me as when like some more like sociology like minded phenomenologists like they talk about the pre-reflection of humans, like this a state before conscious activity. Oh, the pre-reflective period. It's like it's just as pseudoscientific as that. When people talk about like this notion of like the prehistory, I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting that he points that out specifically, and I think it is something that definitely relates to some of the ways that Hegel was taken up in that time period by young and old Hegelians. It's kind of like almost a pre called like this attitude towards the past that almost comes across as like bigotry, not bigotry, but like what would it be called, like a prejudice against this time period. Oh, it didn't have this thing, it's not history yet. Like
I want to piggyback off of what Varsity was saying too, because that whole need, the use of the word need stuck out to me too. But also the word leads to new needs. I think that needs further elucidation as well. Like, what does he mean by leads to? Because that carries a lot of baggage with it as well. Like, is he saying it's necessary from these needs, or is he saying like because of the way humans are, it leads to these needs? Like, what does that leads to? Like, what is the mechanism for that?
I mean, like I'm not forwarding this as like the suggestion that this is exactly what Marx had in mind, but this is a part of this book that I've thought a little bit about. And like, I don't know, I feel like it's not necessarily that it leads to, in the sense like you're saying, like it's necessary, but maybe it's a little weaker than that. Like maybe it's just he's saying like as one need is satisfied, it allows for the emergence of a new need to arise. Like once the need for food and shelter is satisfied, we take care of that. I have the need for, things that are higher order, I guess. I mean, I'm trying really hard to avoid just baking Maslow's hierarchy of needs into this, but it's really hard to resist that temptation because I think it is kind of amenable. But
Weird.
that's,
I'm just always suspicious when someone says one thing leads to another, because I feel like it implies some kind of like necessary causal relation, but I don't think that's what he's intending. And also, it's kind of reminding me of the Republic in Plato, where they start with that original society where they're just eating acorns and like not really doing much. And then I think Adimantus is the one. I can't remember if it was Glaucon or Adimantus, but one of them's like, this is a boring society, Socrates. Like, let's make this a little better. And then Socrates is like, okay, let's add some like luxury to this.
I think that's the opposite view of what Marx is articulating. Like, I don't think he's articulating Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think it's like more what you, Nietzsche, I think probably are talking about with the lack of like talking about these necessary connections. I think it is purely something that basically what's going on is that you have like these social conditions that allow for us to talk about certain kinds of possible structures and certain kinds of possible interpretations of or actions that we can do in the world. And that when we start to develop different structures that allow for different organization, that it then appears that we have new possibilities open to us. So I think that like opposite to what kind of, I mean, in the Republic would be like it's a linear kind of progression. I think that it's more of like, it's just you couldn't even conceive of these new organizational strategies until you have surpassed this other organizational strategy that just seems like it's so apparent. And I think this is something that Marx sees as like a parasitism that like capitalism conducts, where it is basically presenting itself as nature. It's presenting itself as like the natural procedure, the natural conclusion.
Yeah, I think that's why I brought up the Republic. Yeah, it's more akin to like that idea. Like, oh, now that we have these further needs, what kind of structure is going to arise from that?
I kind of have to agree. I think humans are by default wanting people like me. I mean, you could buy me 100 games off of Steam and I'd still want another one. I think and I'm thinking about, the want in these things. I can understand why people would want more. Once they have their needs taken care of, they'd want more things to satisfy the thing of just having more, Like that saying, keeping up with the Joneses. You just sometimes you buy things because you want them, you desire for them, or you just buy them so you can increase your social status. I also think communism has always been rushed, Even if they were going to do communism right, they've always rushed it. Like, Bukharin had the right idea of trying to ease Russia into communism, not just catapult it into. Because you can't just change. Because let's just say in America, there was a communist revolution. America is a society built on capitalism. You can't just change that overnight. You would have to ease the mass population into the ideas of capitalism.
Well, William,
I mean, communism.
I don't. This isn't really a place to discuss the merits of communism or like the praxis of it. We're trying to stick to the book. So I appreciate your input, but let's try to stay to interpretation, okay? All right. So Varsity, would you like to read the next one?
Oh, they left.
Yeah. Well, I don't.
Dude, that was really
Well-
cute. That was really cute, dude. Come on. Like, what? That's baby's first. Like, come on. Yeah.
Well, let's keep in mind too that we're being recorded. Let's not say something we
I don't think I said anything I'll regret. Move on.
okay.
I may have to ban that person. I'll just say that.
All right. You want me to read the next paragraph?
Yeah.
Okay. The third circumstance, which from the very outset enters into historical development, is that men who daily remake their own life begin to make other men, to propagate their kind. The relation between man and woman, parents and children, the family. The family, which to begin with is the only social relationship, becomes later, when increased needs create new social relations and the increased population new needs, a subordinate one, except in Germany, and must then be treated and analyzed according to the existing empirical data, not according to the concept of the family, as is the custom in Germany. These three aspects of social activity are not, of course, to be taken as three different stages, but as three aspects, or, to make it clear to the Germans, three moments, which have existed simultaneously since the dawn of history and the first men, and which still assert themselves in history today.
Do you feel that connection to like Raoul Van Heem and De Boer, like dialoguing about everyday life?
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that to me?
Yeah, it was.
What was it again?
I said, don't you feel that that comment kind of about like the reproduction of like they're repeating, like constructing their own conditions again, like that is absolutely like somewhere where I think the situationists are basically like influenced by interpretations that have come from basically the Althusserian kind of Marxist orthodoxy that was in France. This talk about like the critique of everyday life, like Henri Lefebvre and like Raoul Van Heem and Guy Debord. I think it's like kind of interesting that this concept of everyday life that is brought into that context was abducted haphazardly. It's like actually kind of something that is really at the heart of something that Marx was doing very early in his career, which is to talk about the reproduction of everyday life. I think it's important, I guess.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to that part in the Situationists yet where I've seen that arise. Although, if that's the case, that would just be another thing I can add to the list of things I like about them, because that in itself is something that I've always really liked about Marx. And actually, I think when I was talking to Marximilian about this like a few months ago, this concept of like the constant reproduction of just daily life conditions, like just there's so many places you could take this to and apply it to, looking at like what kind of groups do I engage with and what kind of activities do those groups take part in, and how does the engagement in those activities with those people not just create the condition, but it's like a condition is constantly being like rejuvenated through that activity. And that can be put to positive, constructive uses or destructive uses, or maybe even to just maintaining like the status quo kind of thing. Like, is that kind of where you're going with that?
Absolutely. I mean, like, there's one element of the critique of everyday life which could be totally usurped towards like the ends of cults, the ends of fascistic ideology. It could be like developed towards like petit bourgeois, like kind of like just defense of like, the just any kinds of phenomena. Really, like I think that we had to be like very strategic, very careful about how we dialogue about that, because I think that it is something that not only is very important to the kind of the conversation around Marx and around like all of these kinds of ideas generally. Like I think it's also something that easily is probably analogous to the criticisms that are levied by like reactionary kinds of individuals. Like I think that this is something that like Sorel would also be all over.
Okay, let's.
I have.
talk
Oh no,
Oh,
never
sorry.
mind.
I was gonna say let's not get too into the weeds of other writers. And also I think the next paragraph expands upon that idea, so maybe it'd be good to table that discussion. But Josh, did you have something?
I was gonna mention. I guess mine. I should mention my thing. I think it's like. I just think just to say I was thinking that this paragraph is partly responding to another thinker or whatever.
Okay, go ahead.
So I never. Oh, go ahead. Oh,
Yeah.
reminds me of the part of Science of Logic where Hegel talks about life as this process where uh, uh, things make themselves their own. They make themselves means or whatever. Like if I'm trying to remember the details, and he's like, it is in the section where Hegel, like in the Science of Logic, is in the doctrine of the concept. Which and Marx does use the word concept here, and it critiques the concept of like of approaching like the pre-production of life or whatever from the perspective of the family, from the concept of the family rather than the actual empirical thing of the family. But I mean, there's way that can also be seen as like affirming a certain Hegelian thing where like Hegel talks about how the resolution of the what's it called, the singular particular universal is the concrete universal where we see the thing as a lived whole or whatever. So, which I think maybe you can argue maybe Marx is even being, if he's saying we look at the empirical family, you might argue that like the Marxist perspective might actually be like taking the in a certain sense the Hegelian perspective to a logical end of like looking at the lived universal of the family rather than the abstract universal of the family. Um,
Mhm. I think that's very apt. Yeah.
I don't know. My Wandering Cause also read Hegel, that book, so I don't know if he has any criticism of my interpretation of that section.
I don't have any criticism at all. I think that you're pretty much dead on. I just wanted to say that, also, I wasn't trying to just like kind of name drop. I was definitely like trying to connect with the text with that comment. I just was saying that, you have to be careful with some of the ways that people read Marx. Like, some people have tried to say that, oh, we could read Marx in this like very like strange reactionary way, and I don't think that that's really apt per how he
Yeah.
uses the concept of everyday life. Yeah.
You're good. It was more for time constraints, not because you were doing something I thought was unproductive. Make sense? Okay. So I will read the next paragraph. The production of life, both of one's own in labor and of fresh life in procreation, now appears as a double relationship. On the one hand, as a natural, and on the other, as a social relationship. Right. By social, we understand the cooperation of several individuals, no matter under what conditions, in what manner, and to what end. It follows from this that a certain mode of production or industrial stage is always combined with a certain mode of cooperation or social stage. And the mode of cooperation itself is a productive force. Further, that the multitude of productive forces accessible to men determines the nature of society. Hence, the history of humanity must always be studied and treated in relation to the history of industry and exchange. But it is also clear how in Germany it is impossible to write this sort of history, because the Germans lack not only the necessary power of comprehension and the material, but also the evidence of their senses. For across the Rhine, you cannot have an experience of these things since history has stopped happening. Thus, it is quite obvious from the start that there exists a materialistic connection of men with one another, which is determined by their needs and their mode of production, and which is as old as men themselves. This connection is ever taking on new forms, and thus presents a history, independently of the existence of any political or religious nonsense which in addition men may hold men together. All right. Any comments, or do you want to move on? Because I feel like a lot of the previous comments were expanding on this already.
Yeah, I'm fine with moving on. If everyone else is.
Okay. Josh, you want to take the next one? You there, Josh? Okay,
I mean,
Varsity.
I was AFK for a bit, but yeah, you can let someone else read.
Okay, Varsity, go.
Only now, after having considered that one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, this is so long. Only now, after having considered. Interrupt me if I start roboting. I won't be offended. Only now, after having considered four aspects of the primary historical relationships, man also possesses consciousness, but even so, not inherent, pure consciousness. From the start, the spirit is afflicted with the curse of being burdened with matter, which here makes its appearance in the form of agitated layers of air, sounds, in short, of language. Language is as old as consciousness. Language is practical consciousness that exists also for other men. And for that reason alone, it really exists for me personally as well. Language, like consciousness, only arises from the need, the necessity of intercourse with other men. Where there exists a relationship, it exists for me. The animal does not enter into relations with anything. It does not enter into any relation at all. For the animal, its relation to others does not exist as a relation. Consciousness is, therefore, from the very beginning, a social product, and remains so as long as men exist at all. Consciousness is, at first, of course, merely consciousness concerning the immediate sensuous environment and consciousness of the limited connection with other persons and things outside the individual who is growing self-conscious. At the same time, it is consciousness of nature, which first appears to men as a completely alien, all-powerful, and unassailable force, with which men's relations are purely animal, and by which they are overawed like beasts. It is thus a purely animal consciousness of nature, natural religion, just because nature is as yet hardly modified historically. We see here immediately this natural religion, or this particular relation of men to nature, is determined by the form of society and vice versa. Here, as everywhere, the identity of nature and man appears in such a way that the restricted relation of men to nature determines their restricted relation to one another, and their restricted relation to one another determines men's restricted relation to nature. Do you want
All
to
right.
pause there?
Yeah, let's pause there. Also, my highlight won't work anymore. I'm so sad. All right. Any thoughts?
It's almost like he's giving us his own history of the development of consciousness. Like, when did consciousness emerge and why did it emerge? And he seems to be tying the emergence of consciousness into the emergence of social relations with other people.
Mm-hmm.
This also reminds me of Levinas, but not in like a way that's like distinct from what was described here. That'll be worth going into.
Well, I'll have to look into Levinas then, in that case.
I don't know. I don't know if it's like that. Like it'd be that interesting for you, but I don't know. You can if you want.
Well, I
Totality and
think we're
Infinity.
starting to see that. I mean, I think we're starting to see that same issue of like new needs arising, like, and new things arising out of needs, which I know Wandering kind of pushed back on the Abraham Maslow interpretation, which I was kind of expecting. And that's kind of good because that kind of elides what Marx is, I think, trying to say here, which is more what Nietzsche was saying. Like, it's not so much that, like, it's not just like, okay, I satisfy one need, check that box off. Now my new need is coming down the conveyor belt at me. It's like, no, as new needs emerge and are satisfied, like, new, like, just constructions can emerge that I might not have even been able to imagine beforehand. And it seems like that's how Marx is understanding the emergence of consciousness. It's something that arose out of necessity. And he doesn't seem to think that animals have a need for what we call consciousness because they don't enter in the same that we do.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Nietzsche says a very similar thing in the Gay Science. He says consciousness arises from communication, the need for communication. And I'm skeptical of that, honestly, from both of these guys. I'm even the idea that like animals aren't conscious seems odd to me.
Yeah, I mean, I try to keep in mind when Marx was writing too. Not that we should let him off the hook entirely, but something I try to keep in mind. Although I don't know. I mean, this is after like Origin of Species and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Or is this before that?
I
mean,
think he had
not
already
that
read
Darwin, not that Darwin necessarily commented on the consciousness of animals. I don't know if he did, but just trying to
I
place
think
where
he.
Marx is in science.
I'm wondering if he did because it's really weird that Nietzsche said almost the exact same thing as Marx.
I heard that Marx and Darwin actually lived on the same street.
Yeah,
Oh, really?
to me, that's almost too much of a coincidence to me.
Is there any Nietzsche or engaged with him at all?
Do what?
Is there any evidence that Nietzsche engaged with his writings at all?
So Nietzsche was very careful to not mention Marxism for some reason. He does talk about utopians, but I don't think he really talks about Marxism to any extent, as far as I know. I mean, Josh, do you know of that?
Nope, I don't know Nietzsche. I mean, there's some like people that speculate he knows of other young Hegelians. Like there's like a whole debate of whether whether Nietzsche knew about Max Stirner, for example. So like if
Well, he was
so,
Bauer, and Bruno Bauer. Bauer was like an advisor to Nietzsche at one point.
so
Yeah, I don't think I'm looking it up, and I don't think they really comment. He doesn't really comment on Marx at all, which is interesting to me. I know I was reading the Kaufman translation, and he points that out. So
Yeah, it's interesting like that. Today, like you can go into Barnes and Noble and find a book by Marx and a book by Nietzsche. Maybe of the time they were not as like it seems.
Mhm.
so we go.
You there, Varsity?
Yeah,
Okay. Um, do you agree that consciousness is a social real quick, like we don't need to go into arguments or anything, but like what do you think of that claim? Consciousness is therefore the very beginning of consciousness. Sorry, the very beginning a social product and remains so as long as men exist at all. Like I'm skeptical of that.
yeah. My intuition is to be skeptical of that as well.
Do they mean? Does he mean like? Well, what does he? What in what way is like Marx using consciousness in this context? Does he just mean like? Because some people like broaden consciousness to mean like any sort of I don't like sentience or whatever, but others would like restrain it to like self consciousness or whatever. Like being able, because I can see it seems more plausible that like self consciousness it needs a social component because I think like it's like
Well,
in order to objectify things you might need like some notion of language to parse out the world or something.
Well, that's
Uh,
the Hegelian conception, right?
what?
Sorry. I was gonna say that's literally the Hegelian conception.
Yeah, and the thing that Marx criticizes Feuerbach for, because like it's one of the things that I mean that's like one of the big distinguishers I see between Marx and Feuerbach is like how they carve up human animals and non-human animals, and everything to do with capacity for that sort of self-reflection. Um, that's not so. Josh is pointing something out interesting. If he's saying like that precisely that sort of consciousness is the consciousness that results from social interaction, then that would be weird, given that Marx doesn't seem to have much interest. But on the other hand, he's arguing that consciousness results from social interaction or relations. So
Right.
I would notion of consciousness probably not loaded with like that like the aliens that pure consciousness sneer quotes, which I was kind of snickering at that a little bit.
Yeah, I was doing it while I was reading. I couldn't help myself. All right, let's go on. Maybe we can get some elucidation. Josh, you want to take from on the other hand after that parentheses?
Let me see. On wait, where is on this? So right now it's on productive forces for me on the top. Bird.
Do you want me to just
I don't know.
pick up?
No, on the other right. Where I'm looking for the. I don't see any parentheses on this page. Did you have up, Nietzsche?
Why don't you take over varsity, then Josh can do the next one.
Okay. On the other hand, man's consciousness of the necessity of associating with the individual around him is the beginning of the consciousness that he is living in society at all. This beginning is as animal as social life itself at this stage. It is mere herd consciousness, and at this point, man is only distinguished from sheep by the fact that with him, consciousness takes the place of instinct, or that his instinct is the conscious one. This sheep-like or tribal consciousness receives its further development and extension through increased productivity, the increase of needs, and, what is fundamental to both of these, the increase of population. With these, there develops the division of labor, which was originally nothing but the division of labor in the sexual act. Then, that which develops spontaneously or naturally by virtue of natural predisposition, for example, physical strength, needs, accidents, and so on. Division of labor only becomes truly such from the moment when a division of material and mental labor appears. The first form of ideologists, priests, is concurrent. From this moment onward, consciousness can really flatter itself that it is something other than consciousness of existing practice, that it really represents something without representing something real. From now on, consciousness is in a position to emancipate itself from the world and to proceed to the formation of pure theory, theology, philosophy, ethics, etc. But even if this theory, theology, philosophy, ethics, etc., comes into contradiction with the existing relations, this can only occur because existing social relations have come into contradiction with existing forces of production. This, moreover, can also occur in a particular national sphere of relations through the appearance of the contradiction, not within the national orbit, but between this national consciousness and the practice of other nations. For example, between the national and the general consciousness of a nation, as we see it now in Germany.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
I
not
don't know.
into this.
A lot of woo-woo going on here, you know?
I wish that Wandering was still here because I feel like he would defend this, but this is mumbo jumbo to me just as much as Hegelian is.
Yeah, and I don't get the sense that Marx is joking. Like, I mean, there's clearly instances where it's like he's being sarcastic, you know, when he uses like Hegelian terminology, right? He's coquetting, right? I don't get that tone though in this second part of the paragraph, like where he's talking about the contradiction and this like you know, I don't know. That to me sounds a little woo woo to me.
Well, this is early Marx, right? This is like right after this is 1845.
Yeah, I mean, he's well beyond Hegel by this point. He's beyond Feuerbach. He's you know, at least ostensibly.
But he's still thinking in this kind of dialectical way, I guess, as Loki would say.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, but yeah, this is definitely considered early Marx for sure.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm just things like
What do you think about this?
sheep-like or tribal consciousness. Like, what does that mean? I feel like there's nothing distinguishing these types of consciousness or this like breakdown or ontology of consciousness. Like, I feel like it's kind of just ad hoc.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It almost sounds like a distinction without difference, right? It's like, well, I'm calling animal consciousness this one thing, and I'm calling human consciousness this other thing. Therefore, they're different. I mean, I
But then
could be
he's saying,
misreading it, you know.
but then he's saying this human consciousness is like animal consciousness. Like he's comparing it to sheep.
Yeah,
So it's like,
And he says it's like that until we become conscious of society, but I thought consciousness arises from social relations. So I don't know. This sounds very the one is the many, and all that jazz.
I'm on board with the idea that like consciousness arises out of communication or systems of communication in some way. I just this does not seem the way to go from that point to me.
Well, what would be? I mean, what would you try to steel man that idea? Like maybe there is something we call consciousness that emerges in this very like raw, unrefined form, and then only through social interactions does it develop into anything meaningful. Like, is it possible that's what Marx is saying?
I don't know if that's what he's saying because I feel like this is unclear. I think that would be the steel man, as you said, though, because I think that makes sense. I think that probably most animals have some form of consciousness, like sensory animals, that we would recognize as consciousness, but um I think that it probably does develop because like even humans, like your consciousness develops as you get older. You become more self-aware, you become more aware of things around you. So like it would be absurd to me to think that like your nurture has no influence on your consciousness, right?
Well, even to go back to the whole reproduction of daily life, I mean, you can make the case that your consciousness expands from the moment you wake up. Like, I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but when I wake up, I probably fail the criteria for personhood, the state of mind that I'm in the first few minutes I'm
Right.
awake, like to be quite
Oh
honest.
yeah, I'm awful. Oh, right. No, so I am sympathetic to some of the things he's saying. I just it's when it starts to become systematized, it's like the very same arguments he makes against Hegel, I feel like can be leveled against him as well.
Hmm.
This seems like a realm of ideology to me, not fact.
The first ideologists are the priests. That's an interesting one, too.
I like that one though, because I think that to me seems true in some
We've
sense.
got one more paragraph in this section, I guess, and then you want to wrap up after that one?
Sure. Josh, go.
Okay, well, I can need to scroll down a bit for me to see it.
Are you here? Moreover, can you see it?
Moreover, no, I'm watching your screen. I don't see. It's just it starts with productive forces and then ends in all powerful. Is what I see on screen right now.
Oh,
How about that?
well, that's like all the way at the
How-
top.
All the way at the top. Further,
Okay. So
further
my
that
screen, for some reason my screen is not matching what's on my screen, so I'm gonna try to redo that. My apologies.
All good.
Okay.
let me see.
Can you see it now?
Moreover,
Yep.
Moreover, it is quite immaterial what consciousness starts to do on its own. Out of all such muck, we get only difference of these three moments: the forces of production, the state of society, and consciousness can and must come into contradiction with one another. Because the division of labor implies the possibility, nay, the fact that intellectual and material activity, enjoyment and labor, production and consumption devolve on different individuals, and that the only possibility of their not coming into contradiction lies in the negation of in its turn of division of labor, is self-evident. Moreover, that specters, the higher being, concept, scruple, are merely idealistic. The idealistic spiritual expression, the conception apparently of the isolated individual, the image of very empirical fetters and limitations, within which the mode of production of life and the form of intercourse coupled with it move.
Yeah, he lost me.
Well, that what he says at the beginning almost contradicts my attempt to steel man, where he says it's quite immaterial what consciousness starts to do on its own, right? Doesn't that kind of go against what I was attempting to do when I was trying to like make the best case for what he was trying to say. Because like my whole thing was like, okay, well maybe consciousness starts out in this very like simple form, and then it develops through social interaction. Okay, but then he's saying it's immaterial what consciousness starts to do. So I don't know. Maybe I'm misunderstanding that, but
You think he'd say is saying like, well, material. I think in this context is like, isn't it referencing the social relations of production? So you think he's quite literally saying that like is he quite literally saying that it's like literally immaterial, that is like doesn't affect the social relations or something? It's an and like the later of the paragraph he says like, it's like a reaction to the social relations or something that we of those that are like not, from what I can tell from what I read, it's like a reaction to the social relations of those that are like have lost out on the in the division of labor or whatever.
I guess my question would be, if it's immaterial what consciousness is doing on its own, then how is it in contradiction with forces of production in the state of society?
what
Hmm.
do you mean by doing on its own too?
Yeah, I feel like this was. I feel like he's referring to Hegel or Bauer, but I just don't.
Well, the last sentence is
Yeah.
definitely Feuerbach.
Okay.
And not in the sense that he's criticizing Feuerbach. He's basically it's very similar to Feuerbach's projection theory, where he's like, it's self-evident that blah blah blah, the higher being are merely the holistic spiritual expression of the isolated individual. I mean, that's basically Feuerbach's sketch of the concept of God. Is God is just an abstraction from the qualities or human beings.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that, but I just
Mhm.
I don't get this, that consciousness is I don't get the modality that like consciousness is doing all these things. I just don't understand what that means. Because I think
Yeah,
it
that
makes sense that like I think it
that
makes sense
almost
that our
feels
concept of God
like,
comes from a projection of ourselves. It's just that further step. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I think you were kind of what I was going to say. It was that like it almost sounds like, I mean, I know Marx enough to know, I'm sure this wasn't his intention, but it almost sort of sounds like he's kind of just placing consciousness in the throne that was once occupied by God and then by Feuerbach's essence of man, both of which Marx wants to do away with. But now we're talking about this consciousness as something that I don't know. It's
It
doing
seems
stuff on
outside
its
of
own.
Yeah, it seems outside of material relations. So it's like
Well, maybe does he not subscribe to any notion of an individual consciousness? Like if consciousness emerges only through social relations, is he saying that consciousness is something that is like intersubjectively constructed rather than something of
that might be the Steel Man. I don't know. I don't get that though.
I thought what he means by like doing stuff on his own is like like he's talked about earlier about he thinks that when we have these like where we have these like needs or whatever, we get new needs and then we sort of like, it's sort of like following that same trend, but instead of like us working on the needs or whatever with our uh, body, we were working on with like these abstractions that sort of run amok on their own or whatever, out of control from or whatever.
I wish
Like,
Wandering was here to Steelman this.
sorry, I'm not. I don't know if that made any sense. Probably didn't. Was that this thing we're doing, or we got any more to say about this paragraph?
And his quiet
I
material.
don't think
Got anything left to want any concluding remarks, Nietzsche Guevara, on this section or the?
Looking it over one more time. come into contradiction.
Possibility, nay, the fact.
Devolve on different individuals, and that only possibility if they're not coming into contradiction lies in the negation is turned. It is self-evident wherever that I see. Like, I just none of this makes sense to me, really. Like, I feel like this is the kind of the use of language that I don't like. Because what does it mean to the only possibility they're not come? What does it mean for them to come into contradict? I don't see why like the division of labor leads to them coming into contradiction.
Hmm.
Think some then in which sense of like that they I think I don't know if he's like using like Hegelian like the contradiction where it's like literally contradictory concept. It's more like I think it's in this context it means more like the tension, like a tension of different forces in the world or whatever.
The tension of different forces, and even that is too immaterial for me to understand. What does that? What are the forces? Why are they in contradiction?
Why are they in tension?
What's
Well,
the tension?
one's going one way, one goes another, or wants something.
Do they
or
want? I don't think the division in labor implies they want different things.
I don't know if wants the word for it, but they're moving in different directions or whatever that press against each other or whatever. Or they like I think
Here, maybe this is the key phrase. Josh, what do you think of this? Devolve on different individuals. What does that mean?
I think it means it's like from my guess it's like the devolve on different individuals. So the different maybe is the important thing there, where it's like the division of labor creates a stratification in society, I guess, and that leads to tensions between the different strata. So it's like foreshadowing is I'm going to talk about class distinctions, probably, if I had to guess.
I think I'm starting to get it. Okay, yeah, I think what you're saying is right. So it's like I think Varsity Steelman actually might be the correct way to interpret this. It's almost as though there's a consciousness that is not in the individual, but the forces of production stratify consciousness itself into individuals. And then they must bring it back together in some way in order to negate that contradiction. But we don't really get.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
clash. I mean, he literally uses like a literally Marxist term, the class consciousness.
Yeah, it's like there's one consciousness and then it separates into individuals and then it's brought back together because it's separated.
Uh,
I don't know. What do we make of that? Varsity?
I mean, go down, but I'm thinking about how like most after like
roboting.
Roboting, yeah.
You want if they get like roboting, can we have like people type stuff out and then we read what their responses are, or that so the recording down too much?
We'll give him the last word when he comes in, yeah.
Okay, you got a comment what we said, Varsity? Damn.
Yeah, we'll do that next time, Josh. We'll have people roboting type it out.
Yeah, yeah, we should remember to do that.
Okay. Varsity, you there?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you sound better now.
We're gonna give you the last thought on this. What do you make of my interpretation and Josh's?
I like it. I mean, it at least lets me know I'm not totally crazy, because that's kind of what I was pulling out of that. It seems like it's an intersubjectively constructed consciousness rather than something that's a property of one individual person.
Okay. So we'll
And
stop.
I guess the only other thing I would think of is like, and this is an idea that I see fleshed out more in like, you know, Marxists after Marx, like Mao, for example, is this idea that gets hit on quite heavily that like the kinds of activities we engage in quite literally develop and construct that consciousness. So to your point about how like this broader consciousness kind of seeps back into the individual, that's something I see kind of explored more like with more like direct focus in like later writers like that's I don't know, that's like a big thing with Mao. Just that's one thought off the top of my head.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Well, we'll leave off there. I think that was a good discussion. We had some weird interruptions. We had some overzealous.
I think we gotta put this on a stage channel so that people when they come in it doesn't like go bloop bloop like because when you
Right.
come into a stage it makes you come in like quietly.
Yeah, I also like just the random people coming in and then leaving the meet. Like this is called book club chat. Like, why would you even come in here if you don't want to listen to the book club?
Yeah.